The Kung Fu Panda series is home to some of the best animated movies ever. Notice how I only said some. So it's no surprise to hear that most of these got their very own movie tie-in game. Today, we're just going to be taking a big look at every single one of these games. This will be the rise and fall, if you will. We're going to see where these games peaked and where they fell short. So this is going to be very interesting, and I seriously look forward to it. Let's waste no more time, starting with the first Kung Fu Panda movie game. Releasing on June 3rd, 2008 in North America, 3 days before the movie, the Kung Fu Panda video game would be available on every relevant system of its time. The Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, the Nintendo Wii, DS, and even the PS2, which, I mean, to be fair, has far more strange late ports, if I'm being honest. Despite being made by different developers on each ports, they all are pretty similar overall, but I'm gonna be looking at the Xbox 360 version, as honestly, it's the best version, and is developed by Luxoflux, who are responsible for some insane masterpieces, such as Vigilante 8, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and Shrek 2. Well, at least that's one I own. Now onto the game itself. If there's anything to be said about it, it's gotta be the presentation is just wow. Absolutely mind-blowing. This is a movie tie-in game that came out in 2008, and it looks like it could have been a big-budget title of its time, as other movie tie-in games releasing around the same year look like trash compared to this. The environments, the lighting, the water, all look amazing here. The only thing that's a little bit off would probably be the character models at some points, which can look unsettling at times, let's just say that. But aside from that, this is a very beautiful game. Up until when it came out, this is probably the most beautiful movie tie-in game, presentation-wise. Though, you already know graphics mean nothing if the game is absolute dog shit. So what is this game really? Well, the story follows pretty much the same plot of the movie, though only 20% of the game is canon, whereas the other 80% is filler, and even introduces villains or interactions that were never in the movie. Anyone remember the Wu sisters? Yeah, me neither. Which, I'm gonna be honest, is a welcome addition, as despite its name, Kung Fu Panda was far more story-driven, if anything. Action scenes being saved for very powerful moments, which honestly was one of the best things about the movie. Therefore, following this game's canon to a T would definitely make this game play more like a Telltale game. As you would probably guess, like most movie licensed games of its time, this is an action platformer. And I'm gonna be honest, a pretty polished and satisfying one at that. I've already went over how the graphics look very good, the environments being very nice to look at, especially for 2008 standards, but the gameplay itself feels good, and they actually capture the feeling of the characters surprisingly well. For example, Po feels very weighted, though not tanky, and just flexible enough for platforming to not be clunky, which is very in character for Po if you've ever seen the movie, you know what I mean? Then characters like Tigress or Shifu feel far more light and agile, but in compensation they get knocked around by enemies easier. This game offers a lot of variety in its gameplay too. It mainly consists of going straight and beating up enemies with a diverse enough combat system to make fighting feel fun and engaging, which is surprising honestly, but it also adds new gameplay styles like playing as Crane and flying, Sonic spin dashing all over the place, or my least favorite, protecting treasures. Not all these missions are fun, I'm gonna be honest. As I just mentioned, there's this one mission where you have to protect the temple's treasures from enemies, but this goes on for like 20 minutes. There's about 12 waves of this, and it just drags on, honestly. And I wasn't a big fan of the pond levels, as falling off the lily pads is not a very hard thing to do, and it results in an instant death, but it's not really the end of the world or anything, as this game isn't that hard. Now, something I really disliked about this game was the boss fights. There's only like 2 of them, but I didn't like them. I didn't like any of them. This game's combat is pretty fun enough and works well with smaller enemies and hordes, but when you got these attack-sponging enemies that take no knockback at all, like Tai Lung for example, these boss fights end up boiling down to being mindless, clunky, and honestly just pretty dragged on. And since this game came out in the big year of 2008, you already know there's a ton of quick time events, which is only a thing of its time, honestly. which I usually don't mind. I especially loved QuickTime events in games like Sonic Unleashed or Ashura's Wrath, But here, like in most games, they're just alright. They don't feel engaging or even satisfying to pull off at all. I really hate to insult this game, but they are almost as bad as those QuickTime events from the Spider-Man 3 game, which are in a realm of their own, if we're being honest. But hey, I do not want to end up talking about the Tai Lung fight in a bad light, as despite being, honestly, a pretty bad boss fight, I didn't care. It made me feel like I was playing through the movie, and you know what? That's good enough, honestly. That's the goal here, right? I mean, the cutscenes during the fight looked absolutely stunning, and he even gets defeated in the same way as in the movie. And on a side note, they actually went out of their way to show Po learning this move, which they didn't do directly in the movie, they only ever mentioned it. But with that all said, this game is very short. I beat it in just over 3 hours, which is insane, but honestly a fair length for a game like this, considering they have to drag it out with extra fluff that wasn't in the movie. And I mean that with no disrespect. But if you crave more after beating this honestly solid experience, the replay value ain't too bad. Throughout the stages, there's like collectibles, statues, and extra objectives you can do, which aren't that bad to get, and add replayability to the stages while rewarding you with bonus content like concept art, or a Madagascar 2 trailer. What the fuck? And then there's also bonus content unlockable for the multiplayer mode, which I didn't really get into. I didn't play much of that, but I did find out you can use non-playable characters like Tai Lung, which was super cool. I've always wanted Tai Lung in a good video game, so this is like a dream come true. Aside from all that, there's not much else to talk about with this game, as it's a very short movie tie-in game, as expected, but I'm all for it. It's short but sweet. Any longer, and I'd argue this game would just be a drag. I feel like it's packed with enough content and replay value for its worth. I wouldn't genuinely call this game like a masterpiece in the realm of games as a whole, as it does have its issues. Its pacing is completely off, the story is worse than the movies, its boss fights can actually be pretty atrocious, some QuickTime event sequences do not feel good at all, but on the other hand, as far as movie tie-in games go, I would definitely declare this game a masterpiece. Absolutely. This is one of the best of all times, as its visuals and graphics are rich, it controls very good, the gameplay complements the characters it's based on, which you don't see a lot. Despite not being as good as a movie when it comes to story, it's still faithful and at least tries to add some interesting new stuff that do admittedly land sometimes. And the gameplay itself, besides a couple hiccups, flows nicely and is perfectly length with fun replay value, and even some difficulty options if you feel it's too easy or hard. This is a perfectly balanced experience, and honestly far surpassed my expectations. I came into this knowing it was going to be a pretty good game, as I played a little bit of it as a kid, but I didn't expect this to be a solid video game. Like, Jesus Christ. This is definitely one of the best movie tie-in games I've ever played, which is a very strong statement, as I've played a ton of them. Despite what you may think, this is definitely up there with other great movie games like Spider-Man 2 the video game, or the Toy Story video game trilogy. Since this game seriously surpassed my expectations, I really look forward to see what the other 2 Kung Fu Panda movie games have to offer. Who knows, they could be just as good, if not better. On November 5th, 2008, only 6 months after the first Kung Fu Panda movie came out, along with its movie tie-in game, Activision decided it was a great idea to sell a completely separate tie-in game to the first Kung Fu Panda movie in the same year, this time exclusively on Nintendo consoles. This game would be called Kung Fu Panda Legendary Warriors, also known as the most forgotten Kung Fu Panda video game of all time, the one you probably didn't even know existed. It only sold 70,000 copies on the Wii. It's definitely not the worst selling game on the system, but it's surprising considering how popular the Kung Fu Panda name is. I'm going to be taking a look at the Wii version of this game, but I think it's cool that this game actually uses connective features with the DS version to unlock bonus content, which only a few games did back in the day. But with that aside, let's take a look at the forgotten Kung Fu Panda video game. The first thing I want to mention is that this game has a pretty cool story. It really reminds me of one of those direct-to-DVD sequels, and I mean that in the best way possible, as most movie games don't really bother with story at all. The story consists of Tai Lung returning and kidnapping rabbits and some of the Furious 5 members to use them as power to get revenge after his defeat in the first movie, or in this game's context, the first movie game, as this is not a sequel to the movie, but rather the video game, as it sees the return of characters who appeared in the Kung Fu Panda game like the Wu sisters, which is pretty cool, honestly. I also wanted to mention that I really like the cutscenes here. They don't use in-game models, but they're more like 2D slideshow animations. The art style kinda reminds me of the Nut Shack. Take that as you will. Story aside though, the game itself is a beat 'em up. Pretty simple. Only that it's a beat 'em up released on the Wii. So the gameplay pretty much consists of...
Oh yeah, we're getting there! We're getting there! Are we there yet? Are we there?
But even despite this, I found the motion controls in this game, compared to most games, to be pretty cool, as they introduce a lot of combat mechanics, like tracing symbols with the Wiimote for special attacks, which, I mean, though cool, can be kind of insufferable at times, but they also got a good variety of combos going on with the Wiimote and Nunchuck, and in every stage there's like 3 rabbits just scattered around, and if you get them all, then you can unlock a super attack, which makes you very powerful and pretty much invincible. All these make the combat very fun and kind of engaging, especially considering it's, you know,
Wiimotion Plus! Wiimotion Plus! Wiimotion!
There's also a variety of characters to use, but you can only use one per playthrough, which is pretty dumb, as I wanted to switch up the gameplay. I will also say, this game looks very nice for Wii standards. It has very good looking environments, though when it comes to the gameplay itself again, it's clearly built on repetition. There's only 5 8 to 10 minute stages where you beat up a bunch of enemies, followed by a boss fight and some motion control events. These motion control events can range from pretty cool to absolutely insufferable. Speaking of insufferable, these boss fights absolutely suck. They're pretty much just damage sponges that give you carpal tunnel, and in between hits, they'll send some minions that you fought previously to prolong the fight. All these bosses are pretty much copy and paste, only getting a little bit harder, with the final boss, Tai Lung, even sending out whole bosses after you in between attacks. It's just as bad as it sounds. But after beating Tai Lung, it's over. The game is over, and if you're like me, who beat this game in one sitting, you'll be very happy at that fact. This game is honestly very short, less than an hour and a half. That's insane, but because it has you waggling the Wiimote and Nunchuck non-stop, it feels much longer than that, so I think the completion time is actually pretty warranted. Now, if you're a psycho who uses this game as some sort of cryptic exercise routine, there's actually a bit of replay value here. You could try getting all the A ranks in every stage, which is kind of hard to do, and they even have 2 harder versions of the story if you're into that masochist thing. But aside from that, there's also a 4-player versus mode, which I'd argue is truly the main course of this game. It plays pretty much the same as the story, but you do 4-player carpal tunnel battles, complete with characters you unlock through beating the story, or using the DS version of the game to connect for bonus content. Overall, there's really not much to say here. This is going to be a very short video, as it's a very short game. It doesn't have much to it. It's also a very easy game for me to shit on, but honestly, I'm not going to do that. This game isn't meant to be a full experience. It's not even meant to be a movie tie-in game, as that already exists. Rather, I see this as a cheap expansion to the existing Kung Fu Panda movie game, a little detour from the main line, if you will. Despite its limited gameplay, it actually works with what it has, offering for some fun combos and even playstyles, and I gotta give it respect for that. But even so, even though this game isn't that bad, it's definitely not one I would recommend. But it's definitely not hard to see why this game was completely forgotten. It was probably overshadowed by the much better and much more real Kung Fu Panda video game releasing the same year, along with every motion control based Wii game in 2008. The Kung Fu Panda 2 video game was developed by Griptonite Games, who are not at all responsible for the first movie tie-in game, which is already a bad look if I'm being honest. But who am I to talk? They made Wheel of Fortune on the DS, so obviously they must know something that I don't. Like most movie tie-in games, this released roughly 2 days before the movie, on May 24th, 2011. Unlike most movie tie-in games, however, each and every version of this game plays completely different, despite relatively being the same at its core. The Wii version utilizes a U-Draw tablet. The Xbox 360 version exclusively uses a Kinect, And the DS version is just, well, the DS version. Probably your typical demake, if I'm being honest. This leaves the PlayStation 3 version as the only normal way to play the game, which is the one I'm going to be taking a look at today. I gotta say, though, I am surprised they didn't have it use a PlayStation Move controller, as that's kind of the theme here with the peripherals. But whatever, that's besides the point. Let's just be glad there is a normal version. The first thing worth mentioning about this game is its story. Unlike its predecessor, which covered the original story of the movie it was based on with a lot of extra subplots on the side, for padding, this game does not at all go over the story it's based on, not even a little bit. It actually starts off with the ending of the second movie, technically making this the original Kung Fu Panda 3, with Shen already being defeated and his goons resurfacing, and well, that's kind of it. I don't really know. It's just Poe and the Furious 5 beating up Shen's leftover goons, I guess. That's the entire story. To be fair, it does include side characters introduced in the second movie, like the Ox and Crocodile Master dudes, but that's about it, really. I mean, to be fair, this is a very normal thing for movie tie-in games to do. I have covered two in the past that have acted like sequels to the movies they were based on. But in this case, it's truly disappointing, as Kung Fu Panda 2 is, in my opinion, the best Kung Fu Panda film. I get it's far more story-driven, and action scenes are few and far in between compared to the first movie, but I really would have enjoyed a final boss fight with Shen based on that one from the movie on the ship, if you remember what I'm talking about. Kind of like what we got with the Tai Lung fight in the original Kung Fu Panda movie game. But instead, we get this weak filler plot about Poe chasing down and beating up some fodders. But hey, it's whatever. It's a movie tie-in game. If you want a good story, just watch the movie. Now focusing on the game itself, I do have to say the presentation is just downright dog shit at times. Like, what are these character models, man? That is the stuff of nightmares. Though, to be fair, for movie tie-in standards, it's really not that bad. I mean, this is a PS3 game, and it looks worse than the PS2 port of its predecessor, but that's besides the point. I mean, to start, the graphics definitely don't really matter here. They're not horrible. They don't dumb down the game at all, really. But I will say it's definitely bad for sequel standards, considering its predecessor is honestly a very good looking game, especially for movie tie-in standards. But on its own, as a movie tie-in game, it's fine enough. There's nothing horrible here. But yeah, there's really no point in this game where I can say an environment looks nice or anything, as it all takes place on one fixed camera angle, because unlike the predecessor, which was an action platformer, this is just an action game, without the platformer, otherwise known as a glorified beat-em-up. Except not really glorified. And I just want to say, the gameplay itself, which is absolutely, by the way, designed around bare-bones story combat, is completely barren and baby basic. You are given no combos at all in this game, only light attacks and strong attacks, and 3 special moves you learn by progressing, which all feel super clunky, by the way. Progression is completely built around this boring combat system as well. It's literally just a button masher, and I don't mean fun Dynasty Warrior game button masher, where you're given all these fun combos you can use, but more so, you have like 2 attacks and that's it. For the entire game, by the way. Going back to the first Kung Fu Panda movie game, which had a good enough combat system, one that at least made fighting feel fun and somewhat open-ended, this is just downright disappointing. And you want to know what's worse? The game doesn't even run well. Frame rate and performance are 2 things I always overlook, as 30 to 60 frames per second is practically the same to me. Good enough, in most cases. But here, oh god, you'd be lucky to get a stable 20. It's one thing to be a super boring, a very empty, and just a downright inferior sequel, but to not even run well is a hell of its own. I mean, there's points in this game where it was running at like 5 frames per second because too many enemies were on screen. There's other issues I could get into, like the lack of polish in cutscenes, the awful sound mixing, but I'd rather not even go there, as it's also nice to see the good in things too. In this game's case, I will say I really enjoyed the boss fights this time around. They feel structured, even if simple, and they don't rely on button mashing. They're actually fun to get through, so massive props to that, I guess. And although this game's story and new characters were honestly pretty horrible, I did enjoy some of the cutscenes, especially the ones with the Crocodile Master dude, as I found them kind of enjoyable and funny.
What's he doing? He's sneaking around.
He's not very good at it. Master Croc must know he's there.
I think he's lost in meditation. It happens.
And you know, for as unpolished as this game may look, it plays just fine, other than some frame rate issues. And it's hard to call it extremely boring when the combat is at least functional and doesn't even feel like a drag to get through. Enemies die fast enough, it feels kind of fluid to use, even if it's pretty cookie cutter and basic. But aside from that, there's nothing more I could possibly say about this game. It ironically clocks in around the same time as its predecessor at around the 3-hour mark, but it genuinely doesn't feel as fulfilling of an experience as it lacks variety, a story, a good combat system that actually feels like fun to use and engaging. And like many movie tie-in games, it's stuck with that mediocre polish. I mean, it works, I guess, but that's the farthest I could go with that. And it's not to mention that this game has like no replay value at all. Not that you would really want to replay a game like this anyways, but it does have achievements and trophies if you're into that thing, offering one of the easiest platinum trophies of all time. But that's besides the point. But with all that being said, all I can ask is why? Why did this game have to end up being so cookie cutter, so barren, so empty? Why did it have to get to this point when its predecessor was one of the best of all times in its category? If this was just any movie tie-in game, I would not be making this video, but this is a sequel to one of the best movie tie-in games of all time, and I mean literally. So why did we have to go from hero to zero? Well, the answer's simple, and it's not one you may expect. It's not just, oh, different developers, oh, movie tie-in game, but rather because this game was nothing more than a marketing deploy. Aside from the DS version, which is its own thing entirely, this game was made solely to promote two products that were in desperate need of promotional material during this time: the Kinect and the U-Draw tablet. More so the Kinect, though, if we're being honest. The U-Draw tablet version of this game, from what I've heard, is played through using the stylus controls, which may explain why they dumbed down the combat to be super simple, and this is especially amplified because the Kinect version of this game uses your actual movements to be played, like entirely. So it's easy to see why they had to cook this game down to 2 moves with some specials. As for the lack of a real story or polish, well, that's just because it's a Kinect game. It can only be so long. Using real movements is tiring, so switching up gameplay variety, adding diverse combos, and dragging on a decent story for 5 or 6 hours would make this an absolute slog to get through, and it would just cost too much for what it's worth. It's a Kinect game, it's not even a real video game. It's very clear this game was just scrapped together as an excuse to sell tickets and useless peripherals that would die in less than 3 years. That's just a sad fate of the PS3 version, which is the exact same as these other ports, but without a gimmick per se. I have a theory that maybe they were going to use a PlayStation Move controller, kind of like the Kinect, but later in development they were just like, oh, we don't want to do that, let's just give it button controls. So it just adopts these useless button controls, making for a very barren and empty experience. Now, as for the game's awful frame rate issues, I'm not sure if it runs like dog shit on the other editions, but as far as I know, the PS3 is just notorious for having slow running ports, so overall, this game isn't even terrible. It's not one of the worst I've ever played. I could even see an excuse as to why it's not bad. It's probably one of the most empty games I've ever played. It's very typical, kind of inoffensive, aside from a few mishaps, but overall, it's just honestly extremely disappointing. Although it may only fail a little bit as a game, it completely fails as a sequel to one of the best movie tie-in games ever made. The Fall was definitely a disappointing one to see. I was hoping for an equally good adaptation for the best movie in the franchise, but hey, it's a movie tie-in game. What are you gonna do? We've seen worse, let's be honest. All I do know is that I still have one more game in this trilogy to cover, and you may notice by the title, this won't be quite the same as the others, so I totally look forward to it. Or, I guess after this game, I shouldn't. The Kung Fu Panda 3 video game released on December 1st, 2015, a whole month and a half before the movie it's based on. Coming out on Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Wii U, and even the 3DS. All these ports play exactly the same, but I'm going to be taking a look at the Wii U version. Something else to note is that this game even sports its own title, unlike the last 2 movie games. Kung Fu Panda, Showdown of the Legendary Legend. Okay, I'm going to have to address the elephant in the room. This is not technically the Kung Fu Panda 3 game. is what you may be thinking. It doesn't even share the same title or story as a movie. It came out a whole month before, but honestly, I don't care. This is the Kung Fu Panda 3 game of all time. It shares the same title font as the third movie, it advertises 3's characters, and makes use of elements from the third movie like the chi omelets. And even if it was a whole month off its release, it was specifically made as early advertisement and hype for the third movie, making it a movie tie-in game. With that aside, let's get into the game itself. The first thing worth mentioning is that this game does not have a story. It has one opening cutscene with Po talking about hosting some tournament, but that's it. In getting into the gameplay itself, it becomes very apparent as to why there's no story, as there's no need for one, as unlike the first game, which was an action platformer, or the second game, which was an empty, soulless beat-em-up, this game is a platform fighter. More specifically, a Smash Bros. Clone of all things. They say Smash for Wii U and 3DS, I ask, which one? Alright, jokes aside though, I think we can all agree calling every single platform fighter a Smash clone is getting very redundant. Just because something pioneers a genre doesn't mean it can be the only game to do it right. We've seen some platform fighters turn out to be almost as good as some Smash games, whereas others, yeah, not so much. But what does this game do different? Well, that's kind of the issue. Despite what I said about platform fighters being more than just Smash clones, this doesn't really help my case, as it plays just like a Smash clone would. I mean, I'm playing the Wii U version for a reason after all. The game controls just like a Smash Brothers game would, with your smash attacks, your aerials, even your final smashes. And there's even items and assist trophies that feel exactly the same as the ones from Super Smash Bros. Brawl. But I don't necessarily consider this a bad thing. It's just kind of contradictory to the genre it's based on, and it kind of makes this game come across as a shameless ripoff. I think the worst part is that despite playing like a blank template platform fighter, it doesn't really feel that good. This game has a really cheap feel to it, if you will. Characters phase past each other, making the attacks very hard to land. Most basic attacks do no knockback or stalling whatsoever, and you got these assist trophies that like freeze the entire game for a second. Despite all this though, there is a good side. The game itself controls very well. The controls themselves are tight and responsive, and if you're playing with a familiar control scheme like I am, then you'll feel right at home in this, thanks to this game playing a lot like your typical Smash Bros. Game. So I will say that's pretty neat, and it does kind of help the game in a way. It makes this game easy to approach, even more so than other platform fighters I'd consider more original. That aside, I just want to say that the soundtrack and visuals for this game actually feel very nice. Each stage has a very good soundtrack to go with it, along with pretty good-looking backgrounds and platforms, except for the Wii U version, as for some reason they decided to turn the brightness down to -0. Some stages you can barely see anything at all in. Thankfully though, you can turn up the gamma, and that definitely helps, but yeah, it's just kind of weird that this version is noticeably different than the other versions visually. I may even have to do some basic picture editing to make my footage look watchable, but that aside, the stages themselves are designed well too. There's a good amount of variety here, whether you want to fight at the Dragon Warrior ceremony place from the first movie, the noodle shop, or even Shen's castle from the second movie, which is honestly super cool as it pays homage to the movies perfectly. But hey, everything I mentioned is obviously just fluff compared to the main attraction of any fighting game, the character roster. And let me tell you, this is a good one. It may look small, but they really went out of their way here to add every character they could. I mean, you got basic movie characters like Po, Shifu, the Furious 5, or I guess the Furious 3 since the other two were assist trophies, but you even have characters like Tai Lung and Shen, which is super cool. And if you want to go even deeper than that, they even include some of the movie video game characters, like the Wu sisters, or sister. It's honestly such an amazing what the f*** is that?
And don't forget to give it to a crack addict. That's all we got on the beach, crack addict.
Baby Po. You guys have no idea how insane this is. This is like if they added Baby Mario to Brawl. I mean, Jesus, his render looks like it belongs in that game. I mean, at that point, you can definitely tell they went above and beyond with this roster. However, not without its faults. You see, judging by the cover art, characters like Kai should be in this game, but they're just not. Because for some reason, they thought it was a good idea to lock a bunch of characters behind paid DLC, only to delist the game and its DLC in 2019, making these characters completely unobtainable. is what I would say if I didn't legally own the 3DS version of this game, which lets you unlock these characters through codes, which I don't know why the console versions didn't do, but that's besides the point. I mean, you even get a brand new stage based on the final fight from the third movie. That's pretty cool. But hey, enough talk about the roster. How do the characters actually play? Well, honestly, this game does a very good job at appreciating the character's history with its movesets. Whether it be through the final smashes or just the normal attacks, you got a lot to cover here. Ho slamming into people with his stomach, Tai Lung using his Ifrit frames from the movie, or Shen firing his army cannons and shit, or Baby Po crying. Each character definitely sticks out. That's not to say the roster is entirely balanced, though, as like I said before, this game has a very cheap feel. There are a few weird but cool things this game does differently than your typical platform fighter, despite overall still being kind of a knockoff. For one, the damage percentage isn't racked up, but rather lowered, so basically you start out at 100%, and as you receive more damage, your percentage doesn't go up, it goes down, leaving you more and more vulnerable until you become a feather at 0%. So this is pretty much like every platform fighter ever, but reverse. It's definitely weird, but that's not all. This game even has a super dodge mechanic, which is insanely overpowered and can allow you to launch and recover yourself from insane distances. The devs must have thought the same thing, as you're only given 3 uses per stock. So it's cool to see this game offering some innovating changes. Speaking of which, there's surprisingly a lot of variety when it comes down to gameplay. You have a ton of modes, honestly, which shocked me. I'm not going to go over every single one as there's kind of a lot here, but obviously you got your stock matches, your time matches, your traditional health knockout matches, and even this capture the flag type mode, which I found really fun, honestly. And of course, to top it all off, you got the main attraction, the tournament mode. It offers some good gameplay variety through 10 rounds, like one-on-one matches, team matches, stuff like that. But I have to say, I'm not a big fan of it, only because most rounds can just be an absolute drag, and that's because the total stock in these rounds is set to 3, not 2 or 1. So in my opinion, these go on a lot longer than they need to, but they're honestly okay and fine, I guess. But aside from that, Kung Fu Panda Showdown, a legendary... Okay, I'm not saying that. The Kung Fu Panda 3 movie game is honestly not that bad. Would I call it legend status like the first movie game? No, it's still a pretty janky game with some weird character balancing. Not to mention, it is pretty unoriginal. I would definitely consider this game a shameless ripoff in a way, but at the same time, I don't really care. It's still a fun and enjoyable game that uses that Smash Bros. Familiarity to its advantage. Overall, it's just a fun fighter with a small yet very diverse roster, each character being surprisingly fun to use, and it offers some clean stages and a banger soundtrack. It's definitely a step up from the damage caused by the second movie game, but unfortunately at the same time, it's definitely still the rock bottom, as this is the last Kung Fu Panda video game possibly ever. Video games are getting more and more expensive to make, so movie tie-in games are just not really a thing anymore, hence why the 4th movie didn't receive a game tie-in. Probably for the better, but still. I guess having your death be a shameless yet fun Smash clone isn't the best way to go out, but it's definitely an enjoyable one at least. At the end of the day though, this set makes for an interesting batch of games. It was fun taking a look at these, even if they were all made as some cheap methods for marketing some movies that I've already seen years ago.
Marketing? I know marketing! Subscribe to Mondo Patrick now!